My husband took his mistress to the Maldives on our anniversary. He texted, "She deserves this more than you." I didn't reply. I just sold our penthouse and left the country. The morning I lost everything was also the morning I found out I owned it. That distinction took me about 45 seconds to process. The distance between reading a text message that was supposed to destroy me and realizing, with a cold, almost clinical clarity, that it had accidentally handed me the keys to my own life. 45 seconds. I counted them later, alone in the silence of a penthouse that had quietly, patiently been mine all along. The text came in at 6:14 a.m. I know the exact time because I remember the golden angle of the light through the floor-to-ceiling windows. That particular fleeting ice-edged gold you only get in early Chicago mornings in October, when the sun hasn't fully committed to being warm yet. I was standing at the foot of the king-sized bed, folding a silk sundress into my open suitcase. The silk was pale blue. I remember thinking it was the exact color of the water in the photographs Adrian had shown me of the Maldives resort. I was carefully smoothing the wrinkles out of the fabric with my hands, thinking about nothing more serious than whether I'd packed enough sunscreen. My phone lit up on the nightstand. I glanced at the screen without concern. A reflex, the way you check a clock even when you're not in a hurry. It was a message from my husband, Adrian Cross. I picked it up. "Elena, don't go to the airport. I'm taking my secretary, Chloe, to the Maldives instead. I need a break from the constant pressure of our marriage. She deserves this vacation more than you do right now. We can talk about lawyers when I get back next week. Don't make a scene." I read it once, then twice, then a third time, slower, the way you reread something in a foreign language, testing whether you've mistranslated it. I hadn't. My hands didn't shake. My vision didn't blur. No dramatic wave of nausea curled through my stomach. The people in movies always collapse dramatically when they receive news like this. But the truth is that after 6 years of marriage to a man like Adrian Cross, my nervous system had already developed a certain numb proficiency at absorbing his cruelties. It had learned to process the blow before the sound even reached me. What happened instead was this. I sat down on the edge of the bed, very slowly, very deliberately, and I laughed. It was a small, dry, genuinely surprised laugh, the kind that escapes you when a punchline lands even though you knew it was coming. Because here was the thing about my husband that Adrian himself had never once considered. He was a highly intelligent, aggressively successful commercial real estate developer who understood zoning ordinances, air rights, and municipal tax law with photographic precision. He could read a 40-page commercial lease in 90 minutes and find the 3 buried clauses that would later destroy his competitor. He was brilliant in the specific, weaponized way that some men are brilliant, narrowly, ruthlessly, pointed entirely outward. But he had never once asked to see the deed to the penthouse we lived in. Not once. In 6 years. Not when we moved in. Not when his name failed to appear on any utility bill. Not even when I mentioned, casually, once, 3 years ago at a dinner party, that the apartment had come to me through my late aunt's estate. He had nodded, poured himself another glass of Bordeaux, and returned to dominating the conversation about commercial development in River North. He assumed, because he was Adrian Cross, and Adrian Cross assumed everything, that what was mine was his. That gravity simply worked that way around him. He was wrong. And in 6 years of marriage, that was the first time I was genuinely grateful for his arrogance. I need to tell you about Beatrice. My Aunt Beatrice was 71 years old when she died, and she had spent every single one of those years being exactly the kind of woman she wanted to be, which is to say brilliant, blunt, financially ferocious, and completely, cheerfully unconcerned with what men thought of her. She had built a small commercial real estate empire in her 40s, selling it quietly in her late 50s for a number that, even now, would make your eyes water. She invested the proceeds with the cold precision of a surgeon, and she spent the remainder of her life doing exactly what she pleased, traveling, collecting art, and telling the truth to people who desperately needed to hear it. She met Adrian once at our engagement dinner. She sat across from him for 2 hours. When I walked her to her cab afterward, she put both her hands on my face the way she used to when I was small, and she looked at me for a long, measuring moment. "He has the eyes of a man who thinks the rules are for other people," she said. I told her she was being dramatic. She told me to call her if I ever needed her. She said it with such specific, steady certainty that I should have understood it was a promise and not pleasantry. 2 years after the wedding, Beatrice was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. She was dead within 8 months, and in the weeks before she died, she made a phone call to her estate attorney, a meticulous man named Gerald Howe, Gerald P. Howe, JD, 40 years in estate and trust law, offices in the Loop, and she restructured everything. She purchased the 42nd floor penthouse in our building for $4 million in cash. She placed it inside a generation-skipping limited liability company, Whitmore Holdings, LLC, that she had established years before my marriage. She structured the ownership so that the LLC transferred to me upon her death, intact, untouchable, and entirely walled off from any marital estate claim under Illinois law. She never told me the specifics. She only called me once after the paperwork was filed, 3 weeks before she died, and said, "I've arranged for you to always have a floor to stand on, sweetheart, even if the rest of the building burns." I thought she was being metaphorical. Adrian's name appeared nowhere on the deed, not on the LLC, not on the mortgage, because there was no mortgage. For 3 years, without knowing it, Adrian Cross had been a guest in my house. A guest who left his monogrammed robes on the bathroom floor and complained about the HOA pay fees he cheerfully, obliviously paid. He was not a co-owner. He was not a tenant with rights. He was a man who had mistaken his own ego for a property title. And at 6:16 a.m., on our 6th wedding anniversary, with his flight already boarding at O'Hare and his 24-year-old secretary already installed in the first-class seat he'd bought with our shared credit card, I finally understood exactly what my aunt had given me: a floor to stand on. I stood up. I set the phone face down on the nightstand. I walked to the window and looked out over the dark water of Lake Michigan for exactly 60 seconds, watching the dawn break over it. Then I called Marcus Thorne. Marcus Thorne did not have a real estate license in the traditional sense. What he had was a network, a reputation, and a phone full of numbers that belonged to people who moved serious money without making noise. He facilitated high-end, cash-only residential sales for clients who needed speed and discretion above everything else: divorcing billionaires, foreign sovereign wealth funds, celebrities with image problems, and, on one memorable occasion, a senator. He had been referred to me years ago by Gerald Howe, who kept a short list of professionals he described as useful in moments of significant transition. I had never expected to need Marcus Thorne. I was wrong about that too. He was at my door by 8:15 a.m., carrying a leather briefcase and a flat white from the coffee shop 3 blocks south. He had deep-set eyes that missed nothing, and the specific, calm efficiency of a man who had seen worse emergencies than this and resolved them before lunch. He sat across from me at the marble kitchen island. He looked at the listing agreement I had already drafted from a template Gerald had emailed me years ago just in case. He looked at the deed. He looked at the LLC documentation. Then he looked at me. "You want a 48-hour close," I told him. "Cash only. Fully furnished. They can have everything. I'm taking 2 suitcases and my jewelry. Price it 20% below market value to trigger a bidding war." Marcus set his coffee down slowly. 20% below on a 42nd floor, fully furnished $4 million penthouse in downtown Chicago will have 3 offers by dinner. Good, I said. I need the money cleared to an offshore trust account by Thursday afternoon. I need the new owners holding keys by Friday. He looked at me for a moment longer. Then he picked up his phone. "I'll make 3 calls," he said. "You'll have an offer before your husband lands." He was right. By noon, a professional photography team had moved through the apartment with the clinical speed of a forensics unit. By 3 p.m., 2 representatives of a Dubai-based holding company, Sterling Holdings, advised by a London-based wealth manager named Richard Farouk, who had been looking for a secure U.S. residential property for a senior board member, had walked through the marble foyer in their impeccably tailored suits. They admired the curated art collection. They admired the baby grand piano. They especially admired the 20% below market price tag on a property with a clear, unencumbered, mortgage-free title. By 6 p.m., as I imagined Adrian and his secretary clinking champagne flutes somewhere over the Atlantic, a wire-ready cash offer for $3.2 million was sitting in my secure inbox. I signed the digital contract at 6:07 p.m., using the same hand I had used to fold that pale blue silk dress 11 hours earlier. I signed it without hesitation, without ceremony, without grief. I signed it the way you sign a receipt for something you've been waiting your whole adult life to finally purchase. I want to be very precise about what I did and did not do in the 48 hours that followed, because I think people's imagination tends to run toward drama in these situations. They picture a scorned woman in a rage, bleach poured over expensive suits, scissors taken to Italian silk, a living room lit on fire with a designer candle. That's not what happened. I was calm, profoundly, almost alarmingly calm. I moved through the apartment with the quiet, systematic efficiency of someone disassembling a life they'd already mentally vacated. I pulled 2 large rolling suitcases from the luggage closet and packed them with everything that was mine in any sense that mattered. My clothes, my passport, the 3 pieces of jewelry my mother had left me, Beatrice's wristwatch, a small oil painting of the Irish coast that I had purchased before I ever met Adrian, my personal journals, everything else, the custom furniture, the art he had chosen, the wine collection, the 1,000 thread count linens, the cashmere throws, the 7 remote controls for the 7 different entertainment systems. I left exactly where it stood, untouched. I wasn't destroying his life. I was simply declining to take it with me. Then I went to his closet. Adrian's walk-in closet was a monument to his self-image. Cedar walls, custom shelving, recessed lighting that was calibrated to show the fabric of his suits at their most luxurious. 14 bespoke Italian suits, hand-tailored in Milan, 9 pairs of imported leather shoes on their individual cedar trees, Rolex boxes lined up in a velvet-lined drawer, monogrammed robes on a dedicated hook, a golf bag in the corner containing clubs that had cost more than most people's first cars. I stood in the doorway for a moment, taking it in. Then I walked to the kitchen pantry and retrieved 3 heavy-duty black industrial garbage bags. I did not rush. I was methodical. I took every suit from its padded hanger. I took every shoe from its cedar tree. I took the watches in their leather boxes, the monogrammed robes, the golf shoes, the cashmere sweaters folded in their labeled drawers. I placed all of it into the black bags. I tied each bag with 3 tight knots. I dragged the bags to the front door, lined them up neatly. Aesthetically, they looked absurd next to the $40,000 entryway console table and the original Basquiat print hanging above it. I thought Beatrice would have found that funny. On Thursday afternoon, my phone chimed. I opened opened the encrypted banking app that Gerald Howe had helped me establish 2 years ago through a Zurich-based wealth management firm, Helvetia Private Trust, managed by a composed, laser-precise Swiss portfolio director named Anya Vogt, whom I had spoken with by video call twice a year, just in case. Anya had been waiting for my call on Monday morning. She had the offshore trust account structured and ready to receive by Tuesday afternoon. The notification read, "Incoming wire transfer, 200,000 Taus USD. Status, cleared." I put the phone down on the kitchen counter. I stood very still for a moment. Then I poured myself a glass of sparkling water, sliced a lemon into it, and drank it slowly by the window. On Friday morning, I met Marcus Thorne in the building lobby. I handed him the keyring and the electronic access fobs. He handed me a cashier's check for the overage on the HOA reconciliation, shook my hand once, firmly, and told me it had been a pleasure. I believed him. 3 hours later, I was in the first-class lounge at O'Hare, waiting to board a one-way flight to Lisbon. I opened my messages. I found Adrian's thread. His 6:14 a.m. text sat there, smug and permanent, the last thing he had said to me. I typed 3 words: "Enjoy the Maldives." I hit send. I blocked his number, his email, every social platform. I removed his contact entirely. I pulled the SIM card from my phone, snapped it cleanly in half, and dropped it into the brushed steel waste bin near the espresso station. The boarding announcement came over the speaker. I picked up my carry-on. I didn't look back at the bin. There was nothing left in it I needed. 10 days later, Adrian Cross walked through the revolving glass doors of the high-rise building he had lived in for 3 years. He was deeply tanned, the expensive, deliberate tan of a man who has spent 10 days reclining on a private beach in the Indian Ocean. He was wearing a white linen shirt unbuttoned to his sternum and espadrilles he'd purchased at a boutique in Malay. He had the confident, slightly loose stride of a man who has just been thoroughly indulged and is now returning to his kingdom to resume command. Draped on his arm was Chloe, 24, sunbright, wearing a designer sundress he'd bought her on day 3 of their trip. She was already scanning the marble lobby with the proprietary eyes of a woman auditioning for the role of Lady of the Manor. Adrian pulled the leather key fob from his pocket. He swiped it at the private elevator scanner with the casual authority of a man who has never once been told no by a machine. Beep, beep, red light. He frowned, swiped it again. Beep, beep, access denied. He turned to Thomas Berardi, the head concierge, 17 years in the building, a man who had watched Adrian arrive and depart through these doors hundreds of times, and who now wore the specific expression of someone holding a piece of information they deeply wish they did not have to deliver. "Thomas," Adrian said, his tone already sharpening with irritation, "my fob is glitching. Reset it." Thomas cleared his throat. He did not reach for his keyboard. "Mr. Cross," he said carefully, "I can't do that, sir. Your building access was permanently revoked by the new owner last Friday." Adrian laughed, the laugh of a man who is certain he is being pranked. He looked at Chloe, shaking his head at the absurdity. "The new owner?" he repeated. "Thomas, I am the owner. Activate my key." "Sir," Thomas said, and this time his voice was flat and final, "the property transferred ownership 8 days ago. You are no longer a resident of this building." The color Adrian's face went through in the next 4 seconds, tanned gold to confused pink to furious red, happened so fast that Thomas told me about it afterward with what I choose to interpret as professional detachment. Adrian Cross forced his way to the service elevator. He rode 42 floors with his Louis Vuitton luggage and his sun-kissed mistress and the absolute unshakable certainty that he was going to straighten out this ridiculous misunderstanding the moment he reached his front door. He jammed his backup physical key into the deadbolt. It didn't fit. The locks had been drilled and replaced with a high-security biometric system. He pounded on the door with both fists. He screamed my name down the empty service hallway like a man who has mistaken his own rage for authority. The door opened. Not me, not a housekeeper, not anyone who worked for him or answered to him. A 6'4" private security contractor named Dale Hurst, former Marine, 8 years in executive protection, hired directly by Sterling Holdings Dubai to protect their new investment, looked down at Adrian Cross with eyes that contained no pity whatsoever. "Can I help you?" Dale asked. "Get out of my house," Adrian said. "This isn't your house," Dale replied, pulling a printed manifest from his jacket. "This property was purchased by Sterling Holdings Dubai 8 days ago. You are trespassing." He paused. "Ms. Elena Cross left these for you." Dale reached behind the door. 3 black industrial garbage bags landed in the hallway with 3 consecutive, hollow, deeply satisfying thuds. One of them split at the knot. A $5,000 bespoke Italian suit spilled out across the carpet, crumpled next to a pair of muddy golf shoes. "Have a nice day," Dale said. The door closed. The biometric lock engaged with a sound I was told, later and from a great distance, was extremely final. Adrian Cross sat down on the hallway carpet. This is the detail I find most telling, that he sat on the carpet, not leaned against the wall, not paced. He sat, the way people sit when the floor suddenly seems like the most reliable surface available. He tore open the garbage bags with shaking hands, pulling out suits and ties and watch boxes, cataloging his own life with the frantic, disbelieving desperation of a man searching for something he cannot name. "Adrian," Chloe's voice had changed entirely. The warm, honeyed tone she'd used in the Maldives, the one that made him feel like a titan, a provider, a man worth blowing up a marriage for, was gone. In its place was something cold and calculating and suddenly very practical. "Tell me this is a mistake. Tell me you have another place." "It's a mistake," he said, but his voice cracked on the second word. He dialed my number. The disconnected exaggerated tone played 3 times before he understood it. He called his attorney, Richard B. Vance, JD, corporate law, 18 years, offices on North Michigan Avenue, who answered on the second ring and proceeded to deliver in the measured, apologetic cadence of a man who has given bad news before. The most expensive 15-minute legal briefing of Adrian's life. The deed, the LLC, Beatrice's trust, the offshore account, the 48-hour close. She sold it for millions, Adrian said, his voice dropping to something almost childlike. Half of that is mine. None of it is yours, Richard said. You have no claim. She liquidated a corporate asset that was never part of your marital estate. The funds are in an offshore trust that is completely insulated from U.S. divorce proceedings. Adrian, listen to me carefully. She is gone, and you have no legal avenue to recover any of it. The phone slipped from his hand and hit the carpet. He sat there, in the fluorescent-lit service hallway of a building he used to own in his own mind, surrounded by his clothes in garbage bags, and understood with the slow, devastating gravity of a controlled demolition that he had been so catastrophically wrong about so many things that there wasn't a clear place to begin cataloging the damage. Chloe's Louis Vuitton wheels clicked against the hallway floor as she turned toward the service elevator. She didn't offer to help him carry the bags. She didn't say she was sorry. She pressed the call button, and when the doors opened, she stepped inside. "Call me when you figure your life out," she said. The doors closed. I was told the hallway was very quiet after that. 6 months later, I was sitting on a terracotta terrace in Lisbon, watching the Atlantic go gold in the afternoon light. The villa was white stucco and blue azulejo tile and sprawling, vine-covered stone walls. A 19th century property on a cliff above the river mouth, purchased in cash 2 months after my arrival from a seller who was delighted by the simplicity of the transaction. It had a courtyard with an orange tree. It had a library with 12-foot ceilings. It had a terrace that faced due west, so that every evening the sun died spectacularly in front of me, burning itself out over the water in colors that no photographer I ever showed them to manage to fully capture. I was managed financially by Anja Vogt in Zurich, who sent me a clean, thorough quarterly report, and occasionally emailed me with suggestions for portfolio adjustments. The $3.2 million had not sat still. Under Anja's management, the principal was generating a monthly return that exceeded what Adrian's currently struggling commercial real estate firm was projecting for the entire next quarter. I had read this in a trade publication, casually, over coffee, not because I was tracking him, but because Chicago real estate news occasionally crossed my feed, and his name was becoming more associated with setbacks than successes. The public humiliation of being locked out of his own building by private security had moved through Chicago's commercial real estate community like a current. In a world where perception is the primary currency, being the man who didn't know he didn't own his home is a story that never fully stopped circulating. 3 investment partners had quietly withdrawn from his projects. A planned development in the West Loop had stalled after its primary lender grew concerned about management instability. The firm that had once been synonymous with Adrian Cross's untouchable swagger was now being described in industry circles with a word he would have found unspeakable 6 months earlier: struggling. Chloe, I was told by a mutual acquaintance who reached me through a carefully indirect chain of contacts, had moved on within 6 weeks. She was seeing a senior partner at a rival development firm, older, wealthier, and presumably better at verifying his own property titles. I thought about that for a moment. Then I turned back to the ocean and didn't think about it again. 2 years later, September in Lisbon is warm and generous and smells of roasted chestnuts and the particular salt of the Atlantic at low tide. The city exists in a permanent golden hour, light bouncing off white facades and ancient cobblestones, making everything look simultaneously very old and very much alive. I was hosting a dinner party on the terrace. The table held 10 people: artists, architects, a documentary filmmaker, an expat journalist who covered environmental policy, a retired Portuguese judge named Catarina who had become one of my closest friends, and her husband, a marine biologist with an extraordinary laugh. None of them knew the story of the penthouse or the garbage bags or the 614 text. They knew me as Elena, a woman who had arrived in their city 2 years ago with a rolling suitcase and a quiet certainty about what she wanted her life to look like, and had proceeded to build it. They found me interesting. They found me good company. They did not find me broken or haunted or defined by what had been done to me, because I wasn't. The dinner ran late, the way dinner parties in Lisbon always do, because the food is too good and the wine is too local and the night air is too warm for anyone to have a convincing reason to leave. Around midnight, when the conversation had reached that particular loose, wonderful register where everyone is saying the truest things they know, I slipped away from the table and walked to the stone railing at the far edge of the terrace. I stood there alone with my wine glass, looking at the black expanse of the ocean. I thought about that morning, the silk sundress, the gold light, the phone screen glowing in my hand. I thought about the specific, arrogant precision of his cruelty. Not just that he did it, but that he did it by text message at 6:14 in the morning to spare himself the inconvenience of witnessing my reaction. He had wanted to wound me without watching me bleed. That had always been his way. He had navigated our entire marriage from behind the comfortable distance of his own convenience. The thing he never understood, the thing I didn't fully understand until I was sitting in that first-class lounge, watching my city fall away below me, was that his arrogance was structural. It wasn't just a personality flaw. It was the load-bearing wall of his entire worldview. He assumed I was ornamental. He assumed my value was aesthetic, domestic, connective, that I held things together so he could take them apart without consequence. He had looked at 6 years of my competence, my patience, my quiet management of a life we theoretically shared, and he had read it as passivity. He had confused accommodation for surrender. He had confused my silence for a lack of options. He had not known, because he had never bothered to ask, that every year of that marriage I had been quietly, methodically building a door out, not out of pessimism, but out of the knowledge that Beatrice had given me, about the kind of insurance a woman builds not because she plans to need it, but because she is the kind of woman who understands that plans change. I raised my glass toward the water. The stars above the Atlantic were extraordinary, the kind of sky that only exists when you're far enough from the city's light to see what the night actually contains. You were right, Adrian, I thought. She did deserve this. I took a slow sip of wine. I let the warmth of it move through me. The alcohol, the salt air, the sound of my friends' voices drifting from the table behind me, easy and real and entirely mine, but I deserved the rest of my life. From behind me, Katerina called my name in that warm, arch way she had, telling me to come back to the table because the judge was about to say something either very wise or very funny, and no one was sure yet which. I laughed. I turned away from the ocean. I walked back into the candlelight.